Welcome to the Nostalgia Bubble podcast, the show where every episode two lifelong best friends explore one of their favourite films. I'm one of your hosts, Shuggie.
And I am Nye.
And what are we doing today, Nye?
So today I got the honour of choosing this week's film, and I chose Star Wars Phantom Menace as one of my favourite childhood films. This one, having spoken to a few people, proved to be fairly controversial. But yeah, I think, so just to kick things off, I think I need to add a little disclaimer in here. I am not a huge Star Wars fan. I'm not a fan in the same way that you are, Shug. So I will probably leave most of the talking to you when it comes to Star Wars theory and knowledge. But yeah, like the name of the podcast, it kind of does what it says on the tin. This is a film that just kind of makes me feel very nostalgic. Brings me back to my childhood days, and I've got a few funny little stories. It turned me into a funny little child watching this film.
Yeah, whereas I am definitely coming to this film as a massive Star Wars fan.
Yes.
Ever since, I don't know if I was shown the prequels or the original trilogy first on, DVD, or if I saw this in cinemas with my dad first. I can't remember, but I revisit Star Wars a lot. Every single new release, with their midnight showing, me and one of our other friends actually still went for Solo. It was empty, but we were there. Diehard Star Wars fan. I don't necessarily think this is a great film, but it is still a film I love. So I'm excited to talk about it. And I think everyone gives all three prequels a lot of flack, and there are things in them that maybe deserve criticism. But I think every single one of those films has a lot of great stuff in it that deserves celebration as well, and I'm glad we're going to do that.
Yeah, why not? And I think what best sums up our friendship in relation to Star Wars is when we went to see the final film together. And you spent 2 hours summing up the entirety of the plot prior to the film.
So I think what you mean is two of us were telling you about this, and our friend was constantly trying to refer to the holiday special, which I've never seen and is like notoriously dreadful. And I was just trying to tell you about incredibly important Star Wars details, like the bubble opera, the guy who sells death sticks.
Now this is a podcast, so for those listeners, important is inside inverted commas there, just so you know.
Absolutely. Crucial Star Wars knowledge. Like, one of my favourite things about the prequels is actually that the writing is so bad that so much of it has been memed to death among Star Wars fans.
I did make the brave decision of asking you to talk me through it. So, but yeah, no, I watched this film as a kid and I fell in love with it. I must have, so it came out in '99, so I was about 4 or 5 when this came out. And
it was May '99.
Yeah, so I would have been 4 years old.
Yeah.
And I've got to say now, I'm going to tell you now that Darth Maul is my favourite Sith. Well, he's not a lord. He's an apprentice, but he is my favourite Sith character, possibly even character of all time in the Star Wars franchise. This is, as a 4 or 5 year old, you can imagine that somebody with black and red painted face, horns, and a really cool lightsaber is something to look up to in some sort of weird way. I just remember every single kind of fate that I turned out to, or fair, any opportunity I got to get my face painted, it was Darth Maul. And I did indeed have... I had the model lightsaber. I had Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber as well. And I even had...
Not the expensive, fancy ones. It was the plastic ones.
Yeah, the plastic ones. But, the imagination of a kid that could take you all over the universe.
We had great times.
Yes. Yeah. And I went so far as to own Obi-Wan Kenobi's little clip-in braid. Which, I know Shug's a diehard Star Wars fan, but I bet you didn't have one of them.
I did not.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did.
I was destined to be an actor from the get-go, wasn't I? All right, so yeah, that's kind of my perception of the film. Is very nostalgic. It's what it got me into Star Wars, and even to this day, I watched it back, and although I see it from a very different perspective now, I still have a very kind of a very sort of nostalgic and sentimental attachment to it. What I will do is I'll hand over to Shug to give me tell me a little bit about kind of certain plot points, and just a little more kind of information behind the plot.
So, one of the things that's always interesting to me about Phantom Menace is a lot of people complain about the politics in it. I don't think this is a particularly political film. I think it uses politics as kind of a background for plot advancement. But I actually think that the other prequels are far more political than this one. I think the politics that's happening in this, the trade blockade and the kind of political machinations of the Emperor, they don't really matter. It just matters that he ends up as the Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. It doesn't, and that he's using, Amidala and the crisis on Naboo to get there. I think that sort of, that is actually what these stories are telling, is his rise to power and Anakin's rise and fall. Those are the two, and I guess the fall of the Jedi. So those are kind of the three storylines that are happening in the prequels as a whole. And I think this film, it might be a little messy with getting all of that happening, but I think it executes its goal on having Chancellor Palpatine get into power well. And in terms of Anakin's story, so it's setting up his relationship with Padme, which is always one of the weakest elements of the films.
Yeah, also slightly questionable.
So
I mean, I know it's obviously they are not necessarily meant to have the age gap that the actors do, but knowing that Natalie Portman is 19 years old when filming this does make it slightly odd. And I did feel that last night.
She is playing 14 years old in the film, and it doesn't particularly come across as that.
Yeah, it doesn't read particularly, especially because I think now, obviously, Natalie Portman is such an established actor as well, and you sort of recognise when her career started, and you kind of know how old she is. That it just, it was, but I mean, like I said, I didn't necessarily read it into it that much, and obviously as a kid, I didn't get that at all. So,
and that's always been one of the weakest elements. But the element that works really well is the idea of Qui-Gon as a father figure and losing that. Probably something we'll kind of talk about when we get towards the end of the film. But I think that's a key point in the film. And one of the major people in Star Wars recently, Dave Filoni, who is kind of behind a lot of the shows, the animated shows. He talked about this recently on a Disney Plus show of some kind, and it was absolutely a must-watch for Star Wars fans, I think, because he talked about what the prequels do right, and that is a major part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think having Qui-Gon there as you're right, as a father figure, really kind of it sets up Anakin's relationship with. Not just obviously with him for that film itself, but also with kind of the Force and with the Jedi, and I think losing that father figure does kind of set the tone for Anakin's character arc, kind of fairly early on.
Yeah, as once Qui-Gon dies, he never has a parent figure really, because he's left his mother behind. He never had a father. Qui-Gon became that father figure and dies, and Obi-Wan is always portrayed as more like a brother, to the point that even in Revenge of the Sith, he's like, "You are my brother, Anakin." He's definitively a brotherly relationship rather than a parental relationship. Okay, so before we get into film, shall I do a little bit of pre-production?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the idea for this actually sort of started coming around when Lucas was writing Empire and Return of the Jedi back in sort of the 80s, late 70s. But it wasn't until that the comic book line and Timothy Zahn's novels, which are, some of them are really great, that he realised there was still such a big appetite for Star Wars. And that's when he decided to do a prequel that was heavy with CGI, and he was kind of waiting for that to get to a point where he thought it would be worth doing. I know the CGI in this is another kind of controversial topic, but that's something he wanted to do. The idea got announced in 93, so about 6 years before it came out, and he started officially writing it in 94. Ron Howard actually said that Lucas approached him, Robert Zemeckis, and Steven Spielberg to direct, but they all kind of said Lucas should do it, which he was never... I don't know if he directed any of the original trilogies. I know he kind of was the overseer of it all, but I know something like Empire, he neither wrote nor directed that film. Someone else did. Whereas, in these, he was writing and directing all of it. I think he directed A New Hope, but I'm not 100%. I think the other big kind of aspect in it was ILM, who are the people behind the effects. There was so visual effects heavy in this. There was about 1,950 shots in the film that had visual effects, so they needed 3 different visual effects supervisors to work on it, to divide the work. And I think that's probably, I don't know, do you want to start there, kind of with the visual effects?
I think before talking about the visual effects in this film, I think it's important to note that the visual effects in the original trilogy they kind of were quite transformative. And although I wasn't around to watch it on release, I have parents who were, and I remember speaking to my dad about it, and he kind of said, like, when people watched it, they'd never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that they were done practically. It wasn't computer effects. It was practical visual effects, and they still look great now. Like, it's because no matter how much, we get used to watching computer effects, as we get used to watching higher quality stuff, older stuff kind of, it looks more dated in our eyes. So, I mean, you look at something like The Mummy, or even the 2005 King Kong, which was incredible at the time. I've seen clips now and it looks dated. Whereas, you go back to a practical effect, it's a real thing that is happening, and it's always going to look at that real.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the way that people perceive the effects that are used in Star Wars, I think it's just important to set up that is the original trilogy were pretty kind of transformative in kind of visual effects in cinema. So obviously with the waiting for this film, there may well have been some kind of high expectations. What I think this film does very well is it, and I was actually speaking to somebody else about this, that it very much plays to the audience it was trying to capture. So I think that because by this point, what they're trying to do, it's been a while since the original trilogy, they have got the diehard fans hooked. Those people are going to come and see it. What they need is a new generation of fans. And if you actually look at the way this film is presented, it seems and it feels most like it is targeted at children more than any other film. I think.
I'd say Star Wars films, they are kids' films, and I think people in charge have talked about that. That they are aiming at kids, and that they still want older people to be able to enjoy it, but they are at their heart films for kids, and that's why something like Jar Jar. I don't know if you remember how you felt about Jar Jar when you saw it, but I know I had a Jar Jar backpack, I had Jar Jar toys. For sure, I was a big fan. And, watching it this time around, he was really grating, and it's like, okay, I'm not a kid anymore. I understand that.
Yeah. Did you feel the same way about certain characters in the original trilogy?
Yeah. Watching Return of the Jedi now, Ewoks to me are now
Ewoks,
just they're a really I still love them, but they're a really ham-fisted, badly done Vietnam metaphor.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see all these cultural metaphors sort of all over the place in Star Wars, and I mean, if you're looking for an example of this, then Phantom Menace is the film to go to. Yeah, but I mean, I think Yeah, this for me, this felt the most. Besides, obviously, spoiler alert, Qui-Gon's death at the end. This felt the most kind of upbeat. The most even in terms of like shot composition and stuff, it seemed a lot brighter than um, than the other films, the kind of preceding trilogy, and I feel like this was the film to hook in the younger audience, and I believe it was intentionally done. It was completely calculated, but very well done because of characters like Jar Jar. I mean, you gave that example, and that's exactly what it did. Was it hooked you in, right? And I think that was kind of that was what they were aiming to do, and maybe that's why I still now have such fond memories, even though I go back rewatch it and it's not quite the film that I saw it to be when I was 4 or 5 years old, but because it did its job as a film, and even though obviously it wasn't Star Wars wasn't owned by Disney at the time, it felt most like a Disney film out of all of them.
Interesting enough, I think it definitely has that. When you were talking about shot composition, it definitely has a brightness and a vividness. Like you look at someone like Naboo, and it's just gorgeous to look at. Luscious greens. These like bright, beautiful city. You look at the ships and they're so sleek, and everything about it is stunning. And then actually, I think tonally, if you look at what's happening in the film, it's a war that breaks out. It's a short war, but it is a war, and it starts as a siege. No kind of help can get in, and then there's an invasion, and then they have to flee with the Queen, and they're broken down on a planet which is there are touches on slavery and crime syndicates and stuff like that. I think actually to make a kids film with actually that much sort of darker material in it, and then obviously as we get to the end, Qui-Gon dying, this loss of this kind of parental figure to two of the other main characters is it's incredible to put that in and actually make a film that kids are going to flock to, and they won't pick up on necessarily the darkness until later in life.
Yeah, I think that's what they did really well, and like I said, I think that was the part of it that was completely kind of it was calculated, and it was done intentionally. And like like we're saying with us, the reason it's such a nostalgic film for me anyway is because that's what it did well. It brought me in with the lightness of it, and with characters like Jar Jar Binks, and with how cool Darth Maul looks, and all of that stuff, and the tricks that you've never seen anyone do before, and all of that stuff, and then actually the substance to it. So things like the political moves, and things like the like war and all of that stuff, and the loss of the parental figures, and things like that. That's the stuff that is meant for the original fans. I think that's what, and that's the balance that this film finds really well. And now looking back at it and watching that film back, I can appreciate that aspect of it. So in a way, it kind of feels like more of a rounded film now for me.
I do think there is kind of an interesting disconnect. So there's a lot of Star Wars fans who, it gets to the prequels and they say it doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. And I think, Lucas intentionally made it feel different. It's set in a completely different era. Obviously, this, the original trilogy is, a fascist empire controlling the galaxy, and it's about a small band of rebels fighting back against that. It's based off, Magnificent Seven and going back to Seven Samurai. Whereas this is very much set with the Jedi Order at its height, and it's going to feel different because it is a completely different era and a different kind of story that's being told. And I think that was something that off-put some original Star Wars fans to the point that I don't think they necessarily see the good in a lot of the prequels. Whereas obviously we came to it without kind of a concept of what Star Wars was. And so, we fell in love with this and fell in love with the original films. And that means, we have this kind of view of, we can see, there are flaws in the film, but we can see all the great stuff that's in it. This there's actually a really interesting story being told. I think sometimes the writing lets it down a little, but it is a great story. And we can see this, incredible different world that's been built. I love the kind of, the concept of all these different planets with these different cultures kind of trying to work together in this kind of bureaucracy that's in the way, and how they're all differently run. Naboo has this weird elector monarch system. For some reason, elect a 12-year-old, and then actually have her be the queen when she's 14. That sounds like a terrible idea, but it works in Star Wars. And then I always love diving into these prequel worlds, and things like the original trilogy, the lightsaber fights are all kind of very, it's very static. Two guys with swords essentially hitting against each other, and I think some of them, there's great emotion to some of those. The choreography behind a lot of them isn't groundbreaking in any way. Whereas, like, you look at this and you get to the end fight, the Duel of the Fates.
Oh God, that's one of the for me is one of the best kind of action scenes ever. I love it.
So you get to that, and it makes sense that suddenly these people are being able to be a lot more acrobatic, and they're able to do a lot more because the Jedi are at their height. They are trained better. Essentially Luke was trained by a ghost and a dying Yoda. Like,
yeah,
he didn't have great training. Whereas, you look at these guys, they've all been trained their entire lives.
Yeah.
They are going to be skilled, and that's what I love. You get into, I think Duel of the Fates is the best action sequence in it. But, the ending fight in Revenge of the Sith on Mustafar, between Anakin and Obi-Wan, I think is another great fight. Okay, it gets a bit dodgy in Attack of the Clones with the Yoda versus Dooku, where it's just a mess of CGI, and
he's just bouncing off the walls.
Yeah, but I think when they were choreographing it, the main actor behind Maul is Ray Park, who's a guy who's primarily known as a gymnast and an athlete.
Yeah.
To the point that they had to have, he only has a few lines in the film, but they had to have someone else come in and dub it over because they didn't like his voice for it, so they got Peter Serafinovich in to do it.
Yes.
But it showed that they were prioritizing, people who could do the athletic stuff, and I think that really works for the world that is created in the prequels.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that again, like, that's kind of. And I know, again, I'm going to keep going back to kind of tying it in with, like, bringing in that new generation of fans, but I think that is another way in which they target that younger audience, kind of creating more of a spectacle of it, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that Duel of the Fates for me is one of the best. It's one of my favourite action sequences ever. And
on top of the action sequence, I think it's got some of the best music.
The music is fantastic.
Like, yeah. John Williams, obviously, I don't think anything tops the score for the original Star Wars for me, with, the Imperial March and the Twin Suns theme and the opening crawl music. But the Duel of the Fates is exceptional piece of music. And, that's kind of where the name Duel of the Fates has come from. But it actually means, so much more. Like, it is the fate of Anakin is decided in this moment, because it is Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon obviously taking on Maul. But when Qui-Gon eventually dies, that is what shifts Anakin's fate, and that's why it's always called the Duel of the Fates, is because this is literally the fight for Anakin's future, and because it goes the way it does, that's how we get the collapse of the Republic and the rise of the Empire with Vader and the destruction of the Jedi. There's so much hanging on just this fight, and I didn't even ever think about that until I saw Dave Filoni talking about this, and it's such an exceptional point that had so much more weight to what was always just seen as like a great action sequence.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I think that's what I love about so many of these kind of ultimately these cult films, is that there is so much layered underneath it. And you get the same thing when you watch things like, I mean, Game of Thrones or Star Wars or Lord of the Rings. There's just all of this kind of there are multiple layers to it. Going back to last week's episode, it's they're all onions.
We can't stop mentioning Shrek on every episode because I have friends who already do that on a podcast.
Okay, well, it'll have to be Phantom Menace then every week. Yeah, no, I think that, but you get that a lot with these kind of cult films, and I think it's not only, I mean, it's brilliant writing and it's very well thought out themes throughout and stuff like that. But I think it's also great for and obviously not speaking as a huge fan of Star Wars myself, and it's not that I don't like it, it's just that I don't have that same sort of interest that you have. But it gives so much kind of content and so much material for people who are so kind of so passionate about it to work with. It means that you can come back 10 years later and watch the film again and see it in a completely different way. And that for me is what makes these films kind of pretty much timeless. Like I don't know the theory behind it all that you know. I definitely can't tell you the difference between Naboo and Tatooine. But I can come back and enjoy these films every single time that I watch them. And as somebody who enjoys cinema, as somebody who enjoys acting, as somebody who kind of enjoys the arts in general, I get a lot from these films when it comes to the material itself, despite some of the script work.
Yeah, I mean, I think the script work thing is interesting. So I think George Lucas has always had an exceptional talent, creative talent. And his overarching stories, the plots he creates, I think that's stuff in the prequels is really good. I think where he falls down often is the nitty-gritty stuff of the script writing, dialogue. You look when we get into Tatooine and meet Anakin for the first time, and lines like, "Are you an angel?" It's like,
Well, I mean, if you want to watch the next two films that came out, those scenes between Anakin and Padme leave quite a bit to be desired.
They got worse. I mean, the immortal line, "I hate sand. It's coarse, it's rough, it's irritating, and it gets everywhere," will forever be, held up as a bastion of horrible, horrible dialogue. And I think there is definitely shades of that here, but I think his ability to tell a story is always great. And I think that's what is really well done in the prequels, actually. The overall story that's there is really strong.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what these films do so well, is that they create a world in which the dialogue is actually some of the least important part of it. So the script doesn't necessarily match the quality of the effects if you're going for the older films, or the storylines themselves, but it almost doesn't matter. I think that's what these films do so well. And like one example I would give is, I'm not one for kind of spiritual talk myself. The way that the Jedi talk about the Force and destiny and all of that is not it. I wouldn't go around talking about like that myself. But you just let it happen. You buy into it. You understand that that's part of the world that they've created. And I think actually that is kind of fairly consistent across every single Star Wars film that I've seen. Is that while the script may differ in quality from film to film, it does generally does kind of sit slightly below the standard of the storyline itself, or the effects, or the actors, or whatever it may be. But it kind of doesn't really matter because it's about so much more than that.
So interestingly, you've mentioned a couple of times is actors.
Yes.
I think so there's a lot of the acting in the prequels has been criticised. I think actually it's a very hit or miss situation, because you look the casting of, for me, both Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn and Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi are both fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ewan McGregor I think was pretty young at this point.
Yeah,
so,
I think he gets better
yeah,
as the trilogy goes on as
yeah,
well.
and having revisited Phantom Menace after seeing the kind of films that he did after that, and obviously seeing films that he's done since outside the Star Wars franchise, I I know he's improved as an actor. I think Qui-Gon. I think Liam Neeson is fairly consistent across here. I mean, he's obviously got a lot more experience by that point. I think they worked well together. I think you're right that as a casting as a pair was very good. I think that Ewan McGregor played the role of Obi-Wan. I think he did what he needed to do. Also, without kind of focusing on that specific casting, I think that there was a style of acting very much in this film, which
I mean, I think there's a style of acting in Star
yeah,
Wars. Like
yeah,
go back to,
I agree.
You go back to A New Hope, and I love Mark Hamill, and he's certainly improved as an actor as well. But you look at A New Hope, and he's not exactly, Oscar caliber actor.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that kind of that's the same in a way that kind of imitates the sort of standard of the script in a sense. Like it's a very much like a certain type of acting to go with a certain type of writing. It sets a certain type of tone. But that sits nicely within all of the other stuff that builds and creates what Star Wars is. And although having gone back to it with more mature eyes and ears last night, I did. There were a couple of cringy moments, and you can find them, I think, in the whole of the Star Wars franchise. But I kind of took them for what they were. You know?
Absolutely. I think the actor that really gets a lot of criticism is obviously Jake Lloyd as Anakin. I think it's always really harsh because the guy was a kid, and you don't get that many good kid actors out there.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, it's a lot harder to hone your craft at the age of 7 or 8.
I mean, I think,
and he did the job. I've certainly seen worse.
I've seen much worse kid actors. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if it's just Star Wars fans being picky or what it is. But I actually, given the style of the acting around that, I actually think he fitted in fairly comfortably. He didn't seem out of place in the film, you know.
Yeah, I think he's fine.
So, yeah, I think he did okay. Considering, all things considered, I think he was a good little Anakin.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the hate around it. Star Wars fans have a history of not covering themselves in glory. And particularly there, he wasn't. It wasn't because you're not exactly going to get Harrison Ford out of a 10-year-old kid.
Yeah, no, I get that. Yeah, I agree. I think expectations may have needed to be managed in that respect. But
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, like for me, it was just a case of sort of. I mean, obviously, as a kid, I didn't question it at all. As somebody who studied acting professionally, and I don't claim to be an Ian McKellen by any stretch of the imagination, but as somebody who may understand it slightly more than the average person walking down the street, I kind of accept it for what it is.
You get very few performances from kids around that age that genuinely blow you away.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I don't know how many I have seen. Very few though, if any. So. Yeah.
How have we made it nearly 40 minutes into talking about this and not mentioned pod racing?
Pod racing, actually,
I love pod
very,
racing.
very, very good scene in the film.
I love it.
It is really very. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. For me, it's actually one of my favourite parts of the film. That is one of the. I think that is one of the parts that really draws you in as a kid. That kind of the pace of it. a lot of it. I mean, when you've got sort of Qui-Gon Jinn talking about the potential that Anakin has as a Jedi and all of that stuff. All of that goes over your head as a kid. But it's when you've got things that are kind of so upbeat and fast, and it's like a classic head-to-head. Like, you know, it's going to be those two characters that are fighting it out at the end, and like, you know that Anakin and Sebulba are going to be up against each other.
Yeah, because it's set up.
Yeah. But that is
well set up.
Yeah. But that is, I mean, that's how kids, like somebody my age when I first watched it, that's what I was going to respond to. And yeah, I thought it was great. And you've got the classic, like, he stalls at the beginning and then he's got fights his way back and obviously goes on to win it. And again, I think that's what it does in the way of reflecting that kind of sort of like a Disney-esque tone, is that it's predictable. You know how it's going to go. You know it's going to turn out okay in the end, but you're still on the edge of your seat and you're still rooting for him. And it's actually about how he makes his way back. And also it puts Anakin down as a kind of real bright spark. He's got a bright future ahead of him in a way that the children understand. You know, so you see him succeed in a way that it's easy for us to understand as 4 and 5 year olds, whereas Qui-Gon Jinn talking about his potential and how he might be the chosen one, that part of it you don't necessarily get as a 4-year-old. So
you know, when you're told that pod racing is very fast, very dangerous, you know that he's got to be talented to do it.
Yeah. Well, even the fact that Qui-Gon says that he must have Jedi reflexes in order to take part in pod racing, and again, like, that's something that at the time I just went straight over my head. But
that's the actual line that you need to put in, not the dumb quote one that some of them are like, it's not even a bad line, it's just the cadence of it always sticks with me.
Yeah, pod racing is and just Anakin's little pod. I mean, you and I collected the figurines. We had all the merchandise. I had the clip-in braid.
I had Anakin, Sebulba, and the one guy who keeps Anakin behind him for a couple of seconds there. Yeah. I had those 3 pods in Lego. I think actually all the pods are really cool.
Oh, yeah.
They all look great.
Yeah. I mean, they're... Yeah, I definitely remember Anakin's pod being a kind of staple of the film for me. Like, when I came out of that, and I was like, that was what was on the shelves. And so it was really nice to go back to the film and see that and go, oh my God, yes, I remember this, and I remember seeing that everywhere and wanting that figurine and getting the Lego for that, and that's like, for me, that's kind of entirely what this film is about. And like, as much as the story is interesting and you've got good setups and it's cool to look at the casting and the dialogue and all of that stuff, for me, primarily, this film is that hit of nostalgia, whether it's Anakin's pod, or whether it's Darth Maul's lightsaber, or Obi-Wan Kenobi's braid. And rest assured, peeps, that braid will definitely come back up in conversation throughout however many episodes we come up with.
I mean, I know what you're getting for Christmas.
I wouldn't complain, as long as it comes with a lightsaber of some sort. I always wanted the robes and never got them.
Oh, heartbreak.
Yeah, I know. I remember taking that braid to Canada on holiday with me, the lightsaber. And no, I think I bought Qui-Gon's lightsaber in Canada. So, so I think that's what this film is for me, especially.
See, for me, again, like, all the deeper Star Wars stuff is great. For me, this and Attack of the Clones are just... I love so much of this for the cheesiness, like almost the badness of it. I love, and it's like, some of it's not even bad. Things like the guys who is commentating the pod race. just it always sticks with me. You know, the way he says Ben Quadraneros, stuff like that. I don't know why, but it just always sticks with me. Actually, going back to pod racing, something I noticed this time round was, why the hell? It's a 3-lap race. Why does one of them go into the pits?
Right? Yeah, I
it's
wondered.
A 3-lap race.
And nobody else does. Like, it's not. There's no need for it, other than obviously just to knock one of them off. But
yeah. I mean, they had a pit droid. They needed to use it.
I did wonder that watching it last night, actually.
Yeah. But kind of going back to my love, so much of this is just deep Star Wars lore stuff as well. You love Maul. You can go much deeper on Maul. So you watch the films, and you've got Maul in this film, and 1 minute or so at the end of Solo, and that's all you get of Maul. Whereas if you dive into the animated TV shows, the Clone Wars show and Rebels, Maul is actually one of the best characters in Star Wars. He has such a great story that I feel if you love him in this, and I think you would really enjoy watching those stories, because he has his rivalry of Obi-Wan, his hatred coming from this moment is great, and it sets up so much that goes forward. The Mandalorian show that's out, I won't spoil it, but there's something that appears at the end of that again tracks back into the Clone Wars, and it all comes into this whole story with Maul, to do with the past history of the Mandalorians. It's such a great story, and he's such a great character. And you also you get more from Jar Jar is in the Clone Wars show, and he's far less annoying in the Clone Wars show. And it's all these characters that would just be forgettable side characters. Like, what Star Wars is to me is the fact that these characters who just any other film you'd just discard them. They have these rich backstories, and some of them are still canon, some of them aren't. Famously, there's in Empire Strikes Back, there's a guy in Cloud City who is just running in the background with an ice cream maker, because that's clearly all they had available. And now there's a whole story about this. I don't think it's canon anymore, but it exists. It's out there, and that's what Star Wars always is to me. It's this world that creates these exceptional characters and planets, and essentially play boxes for people to go and create their own stuff in, and grow these characters who have weird, rich backstories given to them by Star Wars fans and EU material, and even the canon extra material now that I just always loved.
See, this is what I love about being friends with you. One of the many things, of course, is that I can say something about Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or whatever it is that you have a profound interest in. And so Darth Maul, for example, I told you was my favourite character, not realising the backstory that he had, and you just kind of you come out with this stream of knowledge about his background, and just kind of enriches the whole sort of experience of Star Wars for a novice like me. So a humble thank you.
So I haven't even seen all of his story yet. There's the new final season of the Clone Wars came out relatively recently, like a month or two ago, and I haven't watched it yet. I've only just finished my rewatch of the previous 6 seasons of the Clone Wars, so I get another whole season which I know has Maul in it at some point, which is so cool for me to go and visit. And if you in any way love Star Wars and haven't seen Star Wars Rebels, I think it is genuinely the best Star Wars storytelling out there. And it has so many great characters. I think you probably should watch Clone Wars first, because there's a couple of characters who come back. But, Clone Wars starts off, far more for children. But it gets to really good levels of storytelling, by kind of season 3. And then you go into Star Wars Rebels, and again, Maul appears in there. He's an exceptional character.
There you go, peeps. That's what you need to go and watch. Right, so I mean, just rounding it all up, I think that's a really nice way of finishing it. I told you what it means to me, and vice versa. But just finally, is there anything in Phantom Menace that kind of shaped your love of Star Wars? Is there any kind of individual kind of moment or character that really gave you that kind of initial hit of Star Wars that kind of hooked you?
So it's hard for me to remember because I've seen this film, 20 times or something like that. I can almost quote the entire thing. So it's hard to remember like what stood out to me originally. Like I know that I did love Jar Jar originally, and that's something that has waned over the years. But I know that I've always loved Darth Maul and Duel of the Fates. I've always loved the pod racing and just this cool world. Like I had Lego sets of the yellow Naboo starfighters, which are just gorgeous designs. It's hard to know any specific thing, but I know, and again, I'm not sure what I saw first, whether it was being shown the original trilogy at a party. I know I was shown it at a party of one of my dad's friends, like work friends, and there was no other kids there.
That's a long party to get through the whole original trilogy.
Well, no, I probably didn't, but I think I was like, there was no other kids there.
That was your introduction.
There was no other kids there, so I got put in front of a TV with the DVD on, and I was like,
and there began.
But I don't know whether that came first or seeing Phantom Menace came first. But whatever it was, it instantly instilled a love of Star Wars. I remember basically rushing from as soon as school finished. Me and my dad went to see Revenge of the Sith in 2005 opening day, and he bought me an Obi-Wan lightsaber, and mine lit up and did noises.
Brilliant.
I still have that. I took that to the last three Star Wars films.
Why am I not surprised?
It's hard to pick a specific thing because I don't have.
Yeah, well, I guess as somebody who has kind of delved so much into Star Wars as well, building that knowledge around it, you don't really get that kind of. It's not necessarily about that one specific moment or one specific character. So,
well, I think
whereas for somebody like me, it's those sort of initial things that kind of hooked me in. For me, it's Darth Maul every day. Yeah. So, great.
All right. Shall I finish off with a little bit of post-production?
Yes.
Okay, so Phantom Menace was released May 19th, 1999. And it was estimated that over 2 million employees in the US missed work with
wow.
on the opening day to go and see this film.
Brilliant.
There were massive queues when tickets went on sale, like enormous. The film actually ended up with a pretty mixed response. It's just, sort of about, middle of the road. It's not actually horrible response. I think, the people who hate it are people who is more out of disappointment than actually the film being truly awful. But it broke a ton of box office records. At the time, it had the largest single day gross. It was the fastest to reach $100 million, $200 million, $300 million. It had a worldwide gross of $924 million, which with a 3D re-release, which I remember happening, but I don't remember the exact year, it exceeded $1 billion, so clearly there was still an appetite to go and see it when it got re-released.
Yeah.
It was nominated for 3 Oscars, which were sound effects, editing, visual effects, best sound, but it lost them all to The Matrix because the year 1999 was an incredible year for movies. It obviously got followed by Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And then Lucas did actually plan his own sequel trilogy, which the kind of ideas behind it have got released. And it essentially appears to be Midichlorians the movie, which is probably the single most unpopular thing in Star Wars. So it's actually quite good that didn't happen. And he eventually decided he didn't have the appetite to make these films, so sold the rights of Lucasfilm to Disney.
Great. Cool, thank you for that insight. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of rounding it off there quite nicely.
Yeah.
Sweet, thank you. And I believe it is your turn to choose next week's film, and I'm genuinely very excited to hear what you've got.
Yeah, so I thought
fire away.
a bit about this, and we have essentially had two fantasy films, really. Shrek is very definitively a fairy tale. Star Wars, I consider fantasy. It is, obviously has basis in sci-fi, but I think it's science fantasy. So I think we need something set in a more real world, but still with some sci-fi elements.
You're telling me Shrek isn't real?
I hate to break it to you, no.
Oh.
I still think we need some actor that was in this film. So maybe someone like Samuel L. Jackson might be crossing over.
Okay.
I think we need more of a kind of old school adventure film. Maybe a tiny touch of horror. Any guesses at all?
No, I don't want to guess wrong.
Okay, so I think this is a film that came out the year before we were born, so 1993.
93.
And if I tell you that it features one of my favourite childhood things, dinosaurs, it's Jurassic Park.
Okay. Yes. All right. I'm definitely game to watch that. I'm very excited. And immediately now, all that comes into my head is that moment where they're peering across the park and the theme plays, and there's that viral YouTube clip with the recorder. We might have to just play that over the top next week.
Yeah, we'll find our recorder and learn it.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, for sure. Yes, bring it on. Can't wait.
Fantastic.
Cool. And on that note, I guess we'll finish there. Cool. I'm Nye. And
I'm Shuggie.
And this is Nostalgia Bubble.
You can find us on Nostalgia Bubble Podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me at Shuggie Says on most social medias. That's SHUGGIE Says, SAYS. And Nye?
You can find me on Twitter at Nyerees, so NYEREES, or on Instagram at ReeseNye, so REESNYE.
And if you're watching on YouTube, I'll put those links in the description below.
Brill. Take care. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.